Welcome to this speaker's meaningful conversation on losing a parent to suicide. I'm John Salmon, co-CEO of the Speakers Collective, and I guess I'll start by sharing that I lost my dad to suicide at the age of 17. Before I introduce an amazing panel of speakers that we have for you to watch and listen today, just really want to kind of, not surprisingly, the subject that we are talking about is suicide today. So just to really say that up front, we know that it probably will be a bit of a challenging listen at times, but we really do hope that we can offer some hope and some understanding and reflection around a challenging subject. If you are finding yourself in a space where you do need to talk to somebody, and there's the Samaritans that been contacted 24 hours a day on 116 123. You can also text the word shout to 85258 and somebody you can chat to over text. So I'm sure also throughout this conversation, there'll be other amazing organisations that we'll be able to signpost to as well. So let's get this conversation going. Got Anna Wardley is the co-founder or founder and CEO of Luna Foundation, a not-for-profit transforming the support for children and young people after a parent has died by suicide. Anna was motivated by her own lived experience and has applied for the Churchill Fellowship in 2019 to carry out international research on improving the support for children and young people impacted by a parent by suicide. Anna then set up the Luna Foundation in March 2022 to implement the key recommendations from her Churchill Fellowship report. And amongst other things, Anna's gone on to be recognised as the WISE 100 Top 100 list, which celebrates leading women in social enterprises and impact and investment across the UK. So very much looking forward to hearing more from Anna. Jack Matthews, we've just been chatting just a few minutes ago, just before we hit record button, is got a baby on and due soon to be father. So we're hoping we can get through this conversation over the next hour before any baby may appear. Jack lives in West London and lost his father to suicide in September 2018. And since then, it's been a long and often challenging journey for Jack through the process of grief, but one he is now more comfortable and clear with. Moving forward, Jack wants to offer his experience to others in order to help ease the pain that comes from the unfortunate loss of a parent to suicide. And when not coaching football, Jack is either watching or reading about football. And aside from that, he enjoys visiting the gym and walking along the Thames River with his wife. So welcome, Jack. It's great to have
Thanks,
you
John.
here for today's conversation. No update on no baby news yet.
No, nothing. So good. We'll put it on ice for the time being.
We've got Katie Irvine, and she lost her parents aged 23 with her mum to suicide in 2019, and then her dad died in 2020. Katie is a Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide volunteer group facilitator and currently training to be an integrative counsellor. You maybe need to, that's me struggling there with difficult words, Katie. Integrative counsellor, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Right, I'll be asking more questions about that. And alongside her job as a sixth form support officer is the pastoral team support for 16 to 19-year-olds. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you.
The reason we're here today having this conversation is down to Micah Mullenders, who's a member of the Speakers Collective and was really keen that we came together to have this conversation. So Micah brought this amazing collection of people together for us to have this conversation. Micah's also an author, yoga teacher, mother, and advocate for mental health. And Micah's journey from actress to counsellor is rooted in personal experience of loss, trauma, and resilience. It's also a volunteer for SOBS, and she leads support groups for survivors of bereavement by suicide. Mike's also got a background in Relate, counselling and advocacy for abuse survivors. So really welcome to have you here as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, with all of those introductions, I guess really, wanted to just open up the conversation really, and Micah, I guess I'll pass it to you initially. And why did you think it was important that we had this conversation?
So when I lost my dad, I was 21. I was about to go into my third year at university, and I was completely isolated, completely on my own. I had no one to talk to. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what the fallout might be. I basically just plowed on. I didn't allow myself any time to feel anything. I tried to reach out, I guess, a little bit to the staff at my university, but no one seemed to know what to say to me. And I think so the reason that I felt it was important for us to have this conversation was because I wouldn't want anyone else to feel that isolated. And I think sharing our experiences, which may have some crossovers, they may not, will then allow other people to, if they have certain experiences, to go, okay, I'm not alone. And I think it's that isolation that certainly for me was incredibly dangerous. So if I think about how it impacted me, it really impacted my self-worth. I felt incredibly abandoned initially. And of course, now, 25 plus years on, I realized that when my dad took his own life, he wasn't abandoning me. It was all too much for him. But at the time, I just felt I'd done something wrong. There was something else I could have done, possibly. It went on to massively impact my future relationships in terms of trust, and fearing that I'd be abandoned again. And I guess the other thing that it went on to impact was my own relationship with suicide. That suicide suddenly was something that had happened within my family, and therefore, was it also an option for me? And I think for a long time, actually, until I had my own children, it was always like this little safety blanket, a very unhealthy safety blanket, I might add, but that, okay, if everything really goes to pot, that is an option. And I think it's really important that we discuss those things to bring it out into the open. I don't want to talk too much. I don't know what other people think about that, whether they can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing. I think, when I lost my dad to suicide, I guess close family knew that my dad had been unwell, but a lot of friends, family were completely unaware of how he was struggling with his mental health. And so when my dad did die, I guess the initial reaction was obviously one of incredible shock for so many people. And and I think the nature of it being suicide makes it's always quite difficult to talk about the loss of somebody, but there's an extra layer of difficulty when it comes to suicide. So yeah, no, really can relate to what you shared there, Micah. Jack, if you would like to come in on some points there.
What Micah said, I think I guess one of the biggest things around losing a parent to suicide is probably a lack of not feeling acknowledged. Like, people don't know what to say, they don't know how to address it, and if you yourself don't know how to bring it up or tell people what it is that you need from them, then you do feel really isolated. And I think what the charity survivors of the bereavement of suicide, what it does is it gives a sense of belonging to people that have been through a shared experience. And with that sense of belonging, there is a feeling of being acknowledged and understood. And without that, I think it's I think it can be a really isolating experience, because it is so far removed from anything that probably yourself or anybody has ever been through, and they just can't relate to it. In those moments, you need people to use the right words and say the right thing and like really get you. And that's why, you know, the community that SOBS does is so perfect, because it, you know, you finally feel understood by people that have been through it. And you can tell as soon as somebody says something, you can tell if they've lived through what you've lived through. And I didn't know it at the time, but yeah, I look back now, and you're kind of just not shun's the wrong word. You're people just don't know what to say. They don't know how to talk about it. And when you're in the early parts of grief, you know, I certainly wasn't too sure how to bring it up or what I needed at the time. You know, it would have been better if he passed away from an illness or old age, because people that are then quite warm in their grief and, you know, they talk about it. But yeah, you're going through this incredibly painful process, and you sort of feel, I guess, neglected, or your soul insides feel neglected, even if you don't know it at the time, which I wasn't conscious of. So certainly what yourself and Micah have spoken about definitely resonates.
Completely resonates as well with me as well. And the nature of the loss, I think with other illnesses, there's maybe a little bit more, if you can ever prepare for somebody's death, whether if they have an illness, something like suicide, makes it incredibly challenging for you dealing as an individual with that grief, but also people to have that conversation with you about it as well, as you're trying to figure out what has happened. Katie is also, you work and have been doing support with SOBS. It'd be good to get your thoughts as well on that as well.
SOBS is brilliant. It gives you that kind of like that sort of normality where you think, okay, like sometimes I think you feel a certain way or you think something, and then you kind of don't say it, or you're not sure how to kind of express it, and then somebody will say something, and it is kind of like that penny dropping moment and that like click where you're like, oh, okay, that's what that is. Well, yeah, that completely makes sense. Or I'm not crazy, you know, that it is normal. People do feel like that. And I think that just gives you something completely different. I think then you can get kind of anywhere else. And like Jack said, like you straight away just know that people get you, like they've been through it, they understand. I think as well, like especially like with us all like losing parents, I think the world just becomes very different. I think when you lose a parent, like obviously I've not experienced like it with obviously a different sort of relation. I think when you lose a parent, for me especially, it kind of is like, I felt like I straight away became that child again. And I was like not capable of doing anything. I was like, oh God, like I can't like navigate just the normal day-to-days, because you're kind of like a child who's been left sort of thing. It's like you're kind of back to that age too, where you can't function without them. And I think I found that really, really difficult. And I think through SOBS and hearing other people as well in a similar position, I find that quite comforting.
I think the fact that organisations like SOBS exist, and getting the word out there about organisations like SOBS is so important, because when my dad died by suicide, I wasn't offered any counselling or signposted to any bereavement support, and I guess my kind of default in the late 90s was just bury those emotions, try and do the best I can to support my mum. And I've got two older brothers, so I guess we had the support within our family, but as far as talking to any other people that had been bereaved by suicide, or even getting some basic support and counselling, just wasn't even offered. And I guess maybe services like SOBS just handy, and I'm not sure how long SOBS has been going for, but there was very little awareness and support when I was younger and then being bereaved. I'd be keen to hear from Anna about the work that you've also been doing for people, I guess, would be interested about the Churchill Fellowship, and explain a little bit about that and how that's also gone on to lead with some of the work that you're doing.
I lost my dad to suicide when I was 9 years old. I felt really isolated. I really felt I was the only child to have ever experienced this. I didn't know what the word suicide meant. I'd never heard that word. I didn't realize that that was a thing that people did. And I was, as a 10-year-old, going secretly to the Central Library in Sheffield to read like kind of dusty old psychology books, kind of searching through the index for references to suicide to try and understand what it was that my dad had done. Like none of my friends' parents had ended their lives, so I was trying to get some understanding why my dad had done that. And for many decades, it just remained something that just was not spoken of. You know, I didn't speak to my closest friends about it. It wasn't spoken about in my family, you know, at school, any of those places where there potentially could have been support. Nobody knew what to say, which is exactly, I think, what other people have mentioned. So for me, when I was, I did for many years, I was doing lots of fundraising for suicide and mental health related charities. And then I decided I wanted to do something more meaningful that could create some more lasting change for children who lose a parent to suicide. So I applied to do a Churchill Fellowship, and it's an amazing organisation that funds British citizens who have I guess a passion to create change in an area, and often an area where they've been impacted personally. And so I put together a proposal to go to 4 different countries. I went to Australia, the USA, Denmark and Sweden, and I visited 19 organisations, all doing amazing work around supporting children and young people after suicide bereavement. And what I did is I took everything I saw working really well and where I was aware there was big gaps in the UK, and published my report, which is called Time to Count, at the end of 21. And I formed the Luna Foundation, to kind of make sure those changes happen, because I was concerned my report might just sit in kind of as a kind of dusty bookshelf and never actually see the light of day. So I was kind of, and I know through personal experience kind of how important it is that we make these changes. And one of the key things that we're focused on at Luna is training people who work with children and young people, and providing them with bespoke suicide bereavement training so that they know what to do, basically. Because what we found was people who are working with children and young people, as has been mentioned, they just don't know what to say. And there's a lot of nervousness about saying the wrong thing. There's a lot of fear. And so what we do is we provide training that provides some knowledge and understanding about how suicide bereavement is different, and what risks children and young people face as a result of that loss, and where they can signpost to support and what resources are available. And for me, it feels so important to do that, because of course everyone working with children and young people want to do the very best for them in this situation, but the reality is they've never received any guidance from anywhere about what it is they should do. So that's exactly what we're working on. So we've been, in our first 2 years, providing training in 7 regions of England, and we're hoping in the next year or so to be doing that on a nationwide basis.
That's incredible what you've achieved, especially off the back of the work that you've done at the Churchill Fellowship. I guess, Anna, you know, when you decided that to take it from the research to setting up the foundation, what did you find that people's initial reactions were to you starting that?
was mixed, really. I think for a lot of people, it felt that people working around bereavement, I think, were relieved that finally there was an organization that was specifically focused on the needs of children and young people who lose a parent to suicide. You know, we know that there's no data, sadly, because the government doesn't count us, but actually the estimates are around 9,000 children a year lose a parent to suicide. It's a significant number. And I think there was some sense that finally there was an organization specifically focused on that need. But I think it's one of the last remaining taboos in our society, someone with children ending their own life. It's something people find really challenging, really difficult to talk about. I think people often would prefer to think it doesn't happen, and there can often be a sense like if we don't talk about it, then it doesn't exist. But we know firsthand, don't we, all of us, that it happens. And I suppose for us as an organisation, we've seen improvements in suicide bereavement support for adults, and SOBS does amazing work. You know, it's brilliant that that support is there. But what we want to see is a real improvement around support for children and young people, because they're often overlooked in the picture. And actually, we really need to focus on what that impact is on them. And of course, supporting the whole family is important, because that better equips the adults impacted to support the children. But we've also got to remember that if there is a surviving parent, and there isn't always, but if there is, they're deeply traumatized themselves and often not in the best place to provide that support. So it really does rely on all the people coming into contact with that child or young person knowing what the best practice is in terms of providing them with support. So that's our mission at Luna, making sure that that kind of knowledge is shared as widely as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's what surprised me the most over the few years that I've been talking about mental health and around suicide prevention is how little data has been made available or research that has been done. I think there's so many areas of health where there's decades, maybe even hundreds of years of kind of reports and insights, but around suicide prevention and suicide, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Michael, was wondering if there was something more that you wanted to kind of add on those points that we've been talking about so far.
That Anna said about there not being any record of how many children are involved. I mean, I was really shocked. It was actually Anna who told me that. But then also about the family needing support. So although my dad took his own life when I was 21, he actually first tried when I was 11. And I was fully aware of what was going on. But actually, if at that point someone would have stepped in to support the whole family and not just my dad, it would have made a huge difference. As it was all sort of pushed underground. But yeah, I think it's really important that a whole family at that point is given support. And actually, in the long term, if you want to talk about people's mental health, that is going to also avoid issues further along the line. I think it's a kind of a false economy to go, well, let's only help the person who appears to be struggling, because everyone in that family is going to be struggling. Yeah, I think it's huge.
Katie, I guess within your work as well, that you're supporting young people ages kind of, I think it was 16 to 19. Are you finding that younger people are wanting to ask for help now and ask for support?
I think that the training for staff and the adults working in the school is a lot better. So there is kind of, now we use obviously online systems. So one teacher might put something on saying, oh, this was a little bit of a concern. Somebody else might say, oh, this happened then the day after, and it kind of helps you to build like a bigger picture. So then maybe the ones that kind of don't come forward and maybe are a little bit more kind of skeptical about reaching out, you kind of have those little snippets of information that really do help you kind of build up to it. But overall, I think obviously mental health is becoming a lot more talked about. It's in the school curriculum now, and I think they know that, you know, the people in school are willing to help, and there's kind of support out there. But I do think there's always going to be kind of, with them at that age as well, you know, they're kind of worried what people will think. They're more worried as well about us obviously having to contact home and speak to parents, which for some, especially those kind of from certain like ethnic backgrounds and religions, that can be really difficult for them. But I think personally, from like my experience saying about supporting the family, my dad passed away a year after my mum. And that was massively because of what had happened to my mum, because the support obviously we didn't have any sort of family support. We had a police liaison officer like as the event was kind of going on and throughout that process. But kind of once that was finished, that was kind of it. And for my dad, especially because he didn't work for the last 2 years, just purely to just basically be on suicide watch for my mum, and he cared for her and he was brilliant. But that obviously then massively took a toll on him and his health, and that for me like was kind of the reason that why he obviously then passed away at an early age as well. I think the impact that had on him was huge. And yeah, if there was support, you know, maybe it might have been different, I don't know, but the impact especially on him and on me is, I'm an only child, so it's just the three of us, but that for me was like, yeah, it would have been really different, and you know, it could have had a very different sort of outcome for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that had been through that whole process. And Jack, you kind of talked about the challenges, I guess, when with the loss of your dad to suicide in 2018. Again, I guess just whether there's kind of any reflections and thoughts now that you feel like you're in a bit more of a stronger place to kind of talk about this and share. Just kind of your thoughts and motivations around that.
I think I'm without a doubt a talker now. I benefited massively from a counsellor or a therapist that I saw for just over a year, and he came to my wedding last month or 2 months ago. He pretty much saved my life. I wasn't in a good place. I thought I was all right afterwards, but I probably got to like the lowest point 2.5, maybe 3 years afterwards. And again, that in and of itself, I think is interesting, where I suppose I really underestimated the grief timeline, and it does get better in the end, but it got worse before it got better. But basically, I saw him almost every week for the best part of the year, and I realized that I hadn't really grieved my dad's passing. I'd administered his life, and you know, having executed his will, I'd done everything that I wanted to do, and I was really proud of doing that, about, you know, selling his house and all that sort of stuff. But I actually really probably hadn't grieved him, and my relationship with the therapist just gave me the opportunity to talk about him, and you know, share some memories and discuss all the good moments and the sad moments and where I was at in all of that. But yeah, like you said, I suppose the process of grief, but as well as the like therapy, you just become a little bit more clearer about your confusion, and you come out the other side of the fog with a little bit more self-awareness. And I think the biggest thing that I guess I kind of tell people since is, like, if you're worried about someone, just do it. Like, don't ask. And I really wish someone would have just turned up at my house and just said, like, I'm coming around, you know, I'm coming around to see you. A lot of people will say, you know, if there's anything I can do, you know, let me know. But the only person that I really rang, and I was in really, you know, like a desperate time, was my mum. And you don't really like reach out because the burden's still on you to ask for that help. So I think if you're worried about someone and you're concerned, call them up and say, look, I'm going to be passing through, next Tuesday, I'm going to knock. And if you open the door, it'd be great to see you. Or I'll give you a call next Saturday at 3. It'd be great to talk. And if you can't, then you're probably doing something better. And then, like we've spoken about, just acknowledge. So like, just say to somebody, like, I can't imagine the pain that you're in. Don't advise them. Don't say, oh, this happened to me, or, don't say, oh, it's going to get better. Just acknowledge, the pain that they're in, and just be there to listen if they want. And I guess, like, I say this, and this is what works for me. It might not work for other people, but I can only speak from my experience. People kind of said, oh, there's no right and wrong. And I'm still not sure how I feel about that, but there's definitely better and worse. And I think I made a big mistake just going back to work. I went back to work within like 5 or 6 days. I did a minibus driver's course 4 days after, I think. And I went back to work and I worked through it all. And yeah, I was not in a good place really. And it caught up with me. And, 9 months after, I was in a really bad way. But then again, probably, 2.5, 3 years, I was in a bad way. My sister had about 4 months off work, just completely. So I don't know if there's right or wrong, but there's definitely, better and worse.
Once, I'm sure all of us here and probably people listening can relate to. I guess 2 points from my side on the people that did reach out when my dad died. Family member came relatively quickly to the house, probably within a few days, and just decided to make a spaghetti bolognese for us all. And I think he probably put half a bottle of red wine in it. So now, always when I make spaghetti bolognese, I always stick some red wine in it. But it was I remember that, and that was obviously decades ago now. That yeah, it again, difficult to have those conversations early on when somebody's been bereaved by suicide, but that offer to come round and make a meal was really important. And the delayed kind of grief or getting access to the help, I think it's, I think also particularly for men, it can be a real challenge asking or getting therapy and support. And again, we can hopefully chat a little bit further about that in a minute. Anna, I guess, kind of trying to, I guess, look at some of the ways of how you coped through that period, of if there's any other kind of things that you felt were helpful, or like what was being said about could be better. Any thoughts there, Anna?
Lot of just numbing out, like just burying very deep down. For me, a really overriding thing was not wanting to cause more distress for my mum. Like I could see how distressed she was, and I just wanted to make things better for her. And that involved not sharing anything about my own grief and distress, and kind of putting on a mask like I was okay, I was succeeding at school. And it was amazing how many people just took that at face value. Nobody looked behind under the surface. And what I was doing is I felt a sense of kind of safety and security in kind of school and my studies, but I was really kind of, I was escaping from something that just was being completely overlooked in terms of my dad's death. And that went on into adulthood, when I look at, using different substances to numb out, being a workaholic, doing lots of endurance sport, and things that on the outside people might say, like, construe as successful and aspirational. But underneath, I was still that child with just completely unprocessed grief, you know, was carrying like a ticking time bomb. And I think it's hard to underestimate how difficult it can be for someone whose parent has ended their own life to talk within their own family about their own mental health struggles, because of course people in that family are all too aware that one potential outcome is suicide. And so that can make it extremely difficult to have those sort of conversations. And, you know, we know at Luna, you know, statistically, as somebody who's experienced the death of a parent by suicide, I have an increased suicide risk myself. And it, you know, it goes from a very small risk to a small risk. So it's worth keeping that in perspective. But any increased suicide risk is something that we need to be acutely aware of. And I think, yeah, it can just be just very difficult. I think Micah mentioned earlier on in the conversation how that is there in, you know, if you're having a conversation, it's almost like that possibility is always in the room because a significant person in your life has ended their life. And I don't think you can underestimate the potential impact on self-worth. You know, that for me has been huge through my life. You know, that feeling of not being enough for my dad to stay alive, to see me grow up, see me, you know, become a mom, have all these key life experiences. And that is something that with lots and lots of therapy, you know, being through, I can, you know, I now have a different framing of that. But for a young child growing up, it can seem quite binary. You know, it's like, okay, my mum or dad, they had a choice to stay alive and watch me grow up and be there for me, or kill themselves. And they killed themselves. Therefore, they didn't want to see me grow up and be there for me. You know, that's particularly young children. And sadly, we know it's actually the youngest children that face the most significant risk. There was a piece of research came out last year from Denmark that showed actually children who lost a parent to suicide age between 2 and 5 years old actually face the most significant increase in suicide risk themselves. And I think previous to that, people often thought it would be those who lost the parent in their kind of adolescent teenage years. So I think it's so important that whether it's a very young child or, you know, at any point, those developmental years, it's such a significant loss. And it's so different when somebody's ended their own life, and just being aware, just aware of that difference. You know, there's so I think often, particularly in schools and colleges, it kind of all gets covered in a kind of like it's a parental bereavement, and not acknowledging that there is something very specifically different around a suicide bereavement and how that can impact the mental health of the child, their sense of worth, you know, their likelihood to self-harm and like risk-taking behavior. And that to me is one of the most important things, raising awareness around that.
Yeah, I think the research that has come out that you highlighted there says that there's some key signs of interventions that could happen earlier on to more high risk groups that could be impacted by suicide. I guess I'm one of those statistics. I guess you know, as a young, I had two older brothers, but I think it was me being the youngest had probably the most severe impact on my mental health a few years later, which also included an attempt when I was severely unwell. I guess, Micah, you know, just anything else further that you wanted to come in on the points that Anna raised there?
I can completely relate to that risk for yourself. So when I was 15, I also made an attempt, because at age 11, when my dad first attempted, I was told life is too much for him. So then when life felt like it was too much for me, that was the obvious solution. And that again is the reason why it's so important that we talk to young children, because like Anna said, children want the world to make sense, so they will try and add it up in their with their lack of understanding. So it's really important that we take this further and talk to them. I think the other thing that I wanted to add was also just how surreal it all was at the time it happened. That certainly for me, I'd never had anything to do with the police before, and then suddenly the police are in your world. All these people outside of your family are connected with your parents passing, so the grief again becomes quite public. You know, there was an inquest, there were press at the inquest. It's all so much bigger, and so unusual, that you're dealing with these really, you're dealing with the most personal of losses, and yet it's also very public. It almost, I remember sitting in the back of the police car when I had to go and identify my dad's body, and I was just thinking, I felt like I was in an episode of EastEnders. I felt like I was sort of outside myself. What is this? This is, 1 minute ago I was at home in my flat, and the next I've been told that this had happened. And Anna, you mentioned this as well, this idea of just detaching and disassociating. I think I did that for an incredibly long time, that I just pushed it all down and I just didn't feel the feelings. But again, for me, like Jack mentioned as well, it really was an incredible therapist that really just helped me to feel all that pain. But it was a proper, for me as well, Jack, you were saying, you know, once a week. I think I went to see my therapist at some points 3 times a week. I couldn't feel on my own, so I just needed someone to sit with me and to almost take on a parental role while I did my grieving and feeling, because it felt too much to do on my own. Yeah. And then
carry on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and the other thing for me that helped as well was yoga, was just finding a new relationship with myself, coming into a space where everything was permissive, where I started to, it was almost like therapy helped me to understand why I was the way I was, and then yoga helped me to shift out of that. So I'd become very controlling. That was how I felt safe. And yeah, yoga then allowed that almost to dissipate and to melt a little. And also then support groups, even though I'm sure SOBS was around when my dad passed, but I knew nothing about it. So even 25 years later, coming to a SOBS group was an incredible experience, to talk to other people who had experienced that. And as both Jack and Katie said, just to feel less alone, to feel understood, to feel, yeah, like, I don't know, less of a freak, you know.
Yeah, and I guess for me, when I kind of got my feet back on the ground, and my road to kind of getting better was running, I guess. So yeah, not yoga, but yeah, there was some sort of, as you say, some sort of control there that I had of myself, being able to, yeah, go for that run and that space. Katie, yeah, how about yourself? Any kind of coping strategies or things that have been helpful, or yeah, to kind of get you, you know, support you through the grief and getting back on your feet?
Like therapy for me has been massive. I didn't really want to go to therapy. I don't really know why. I think I saw a school counsellor throughout, like, kind of obviously my time at school and through sixth form, and I was just kind of like, oh, it's not really for me. Just, there's someone who's paid to listen to you for an hour. They're not really that bothered. Like, I just rant to somebody else, like rant to a friend or something. And I saw a couple of counsellors after, again, because a lot of people said, you need to go to counselling. And I kind of just went, I think, again, I was very like detached from it and kind of like, oh, I'm just going here because, it's a tick box. I need to go to counselling and now I need to do this. I didn't really find any benefit from it. And then it was kind of a couple of years later, I then was like, okay, I'm going to actually look for a counsellor, see if I can find someone. And I went to the Wellbeing Therapy Hub, who are based in Epsom and Kingston, and they've just been amazing. I found someone who I straight away clicked with, and she, a little bit like Micah, she's kind of taken on that parent role, that kind of, she kind of guides me through, and kind of, not by telling me what to do, but just by, I think, her probably consistency and just her always showing up, always being there. And I think that fear of like abandonment, or I think I've become very like, I need to make sure I go to every event, or I speak to every friend, or, I don't let anybody down, because I don't want them to then kind of like just leave. So I think it was just a massive change for me to have that consistent person that, even when I'm being an absolute nightmare, which can happen a lot, being difficult, or, having just a moment, it's that consistent, like unconditional, like love and support, really. And that has just been massive for me, and definitely what's kind of inspired me to then go, no, this is what I want to do job wise, working currently with the kids. I love that kind of that support. I love the pastoral support that we give, the one-to-one conversations, and that, I think, it's a kind of a great combination of the two things that I love, supporting the young people as well as kind of experiencing therapy, and the massive impact that's had.
Yeah, I think with therapy, I would have made a dramatic difference to me if I'd been offered that early on. And I guess through the experience that you have gone through, it's wonderful to hear that you're now helping other people that are going through difficult situations. I guess something that I've kind of, I think, has, I guess, if there could ever be a benefit of going through something so difficult, whether it's been bereaved by suicide or a mental illness, and getting through that, is I think empathy. And when working with other people, I kind of, maybe a bit more tuned in to how people are feeling, and knowing when to push, when to kind of get the best out of people, but also when to kind of step back and listen. Jack, you talk about football, and we've got this far into the podcast without talking about football, so I'm keen to get your thoughts on if that's been something that's helped you along the way.
I guess just to pick up on what you just said there around feeling somewhat of a greater sense of empathy for others. I think that's something that I try to incorporate into my work in football. And football is typically like an arena where conversations are shared on a very surface level. There's a lot of banter. Things are very short term and judgmental. So whether that's me talking with colleagues or me talking with players or parents, exactly as you said it there, just sensing the opportunity where you think actually somebody else is kind of reaching out an arm, and they just want you to grab it. And in those moments, just being prepared to take on tough conversations, which I now, like, personally and professionally, I want to make sure that I do that in my life. I kind of feel like what I've been through, if there's going to be any good to come out of it, then I want to make sure that I harness that. And I think one of the things is, if something traumatic has happened to somebody else, then I'm never not addressing it. I'm going to say, hey, look, I understand what's going on. Like, let's talk about it, and I want to be here to help you. So within that, within the football world, I'd like to think that something that maybe differentiates me is that I'm prepared just to take on like a challenging conversation or ask someone about their feelings or experiences or emotions, and hopefully they feel safe to share that with me, where they feel that, you know, I'm trying to understand or I listen, and there is that sense of empathy. Something that made me feel more positive about the experience is this idea of post-traumatic growth, PTG, and it is that it sounds corny and it sounds cheesy, but the real tough moments that you go through can be the thing that fosters the most growth in you. And I feel like personally that there is this previously untapped but now tapped well, or reservoir of like a greater emotional strength, or like a willingness to, you know, seek to understand others, or to extend, you know, kindness or gratitude or whatever it is. And, you know, some friendships fall by the wayside and other friendships take on a new meaning. But yeah, I'd like to think if there's a silver lining, then it is just a willingness to, you know, say, hey, look, let's have a laugh and a joke later, but maybe now we need to address something, and I'm going to help you, and we're going to go through it together. And, you know, so maybe some people don't want to, or they're not there, or they don't really understand, or they don't want to be forced, or they're fearful, but at least you're one of a number of people that are willing to, you know, just to nudge them forward, maybe. But yeah, I guess as we've spoken about, probably unhealthily, I threw myself into my work, and, you know, you think you're all right, but you realize looking back that you probably weren't at the time. And I think, I don't know, I think probably one of the biggest things really is this idea of acceptance, which again, I thought I would have understood before, but really you kind of understand it literally, but you don't really understand it until you go through it. But it's this idea of like full acceptance is understanding that the world is just completely uncontrollable, but being totally in control of that feeling and that experience. And I kind of now feel like, and I have done for a while, I just think naively, but I think I can handle anything. I live with a like a calm sense that like something tough might come along and I think I'll be all right. So like genuine knowing, like really palpably, I can't control anything, but I'm really in control of that as well. Yeah, I don't know if I'd link that well enough to football, really, but
no, I think, well, I think what you're saying there about post-traumatic growth, and, you know, once you've got through something incredibly tough in your life, I know speaking personally has meant that I've been able to take on some things that are a bit of a challenge, but you know, kind of, yeah, thought if I'd been able to get through that, yeah, what's the worst that can happen? So I think, yes, some really positive words there as well. Also, Jack, that I think people will be able to draw hopefully some comfort from, who, if they have been recently bereaved, and also bereaved by suicide, is that with the right help and support, that things can actually come out of this that will help you in your future work, or with people and friends that you may support along the way. And Anna, I guess you're a perfect example, I guess, as somebody that has used their life experience to do good with the Luna Foundation. And so, yeah, any other kind of thoughts and reflections as we start to draw this conversation to a close?
Yeah, when Jack was just mentioning then about post-traumatic growth, I remember a few years ago when I was doing my Churchill Fellowship and I was in Australia, I was invited to speak at a conference in Sydney, and it was the Australian Suicide Postvention Conference. So it was all the organisations from across Australia all come together in Sydney for this like multi-day conference, and I did a keynote speech, and I remember standing on the stage and thinking, were it not for my dad ending his own life, I wouldn't be stood here. Like, I wouldn't be in Sydney delivering this keynote at this conference. And And I actually spoke, and it felt really difficult at the time. I'd written the speech on the plane, and I'd written about how actually, as well as it being, you know, deeply traumatic experience that had had, like, you know, multiple negative impacts on my mental health, you know, my ability to form, you know, healthy relationships, all these things. Also, like, it's shaped my life in terms of like the resilience, the pool of resilience I have to tap into, the kind of sense of purpose that I have in terms of the work that I do. And it felt really hard saying that out loud, because of course it sounds like, to say that you kind of benefited in some way from your parents' suicide or good things came from it, felt in itself quite taboo. But that is the reality, and it's kind of, it's made me into the person that I am today, like someone with like a lot of empathy, a lot of understanding for others when going through like really challenging times. You know, I'm able to lead an organization dealing with what is a really taboo subject still. And I'm pretty certain I wouldn't be able to do that had I not had that experience myself. And so, and I guess people will be listening to this who have lost a parent to suicide maybe relatively recently. And I guess everything in life is shades of grey, isn't it? It's not black and white. And at Luna, we talk about the risks posed by this sort of loss, but at the same time, it can also be a protective factor in terms of suicide risk. And for me personally, it has been, because I guess I'm so acutely aware of what the suicide of my dad, the kind of impact of that's actually acted as a protective mechanism for me personally. So yeah, life, yeah, it's such a bag of contradictions, isn't it, life sometimes? But I know me, I wouldn't be the person I am now today doing what I do were it not for losing my dad to suicide as a child. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And Micah, and any final kind of reflections? And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody to all of you that have shared so much in such a short period of time. This like hour has gone by incredibly quickly. Micah, any kind of final thoughts? And again, to the rest of the guests on the podcast as well, if there's any other final things that you would like to say, please jump in. But I'll pass over to you, Micah, just if there's any kind of final thoughts or words from yourself.
I can really relate to what Anna said when she's describing herself being there, giving this speech. For me, that's the same thing, that if it hadn't have been for my dad taking his own life, I would never have written a book. There's just no way. And that holds a kind of sweet spot for me, because I know that he always would have wanted to write a book himself. So he didn't write his book, but I wrote it for him and about him. But so I think, yeah, just to echo the empathy that grows because of the experience, and also what Jack said, just to reach out to people if you think they're unsure. I'm a big believer in talking, in sharing our humanness, in sharing our vulnerabilities, and in holding each other up. And, you know, just being here with the five of you speaks for that as well. And how wonderful and beautiful that, you know, you're prepared to share. And the hope is that maybe that will help others too. So yeah, thank you all for buying into my idea that this was a good thing to do.
Yeah, it was completely a great thing to do, Micah. So thank you so much for getting us all together to have this conversation. I'm a trustee of a charity called Let's Talk About Loss, and I wouldn't be doing a very good job as a trustee if I didn't use this as an opportunity to promote the amazing work that Let's Talk About Loss is doing, supporting young people bereaved by suicide. So if you're needing to signpost or somebody or yourself have been bereaved, definitely give Let's Talk About Loss a Google. We talked about SOBs. I don't know if there's any other organisations, and Luna Foundation.
I was going to ask, John, if I could just mention, so at Luna, we don't provide any direct support to children, young people and families. We're very much focused on training people who work with children and young people, and we produce resources and guides for families and professionals. But I did want to mention, so we have our Luna Lived Experience Network, and Micah is actually one of our members. So if there's anybody listening who has lost a parent to suicide during childhood and they're interested in being part of that network, the group is really involved in kind of shaping and guiding all the work that we're doing at Luna. And it's so it's not a grief support group, it's more a group of change makers who want to use the experience that they've had themselves to create change for others. But if there's anybody listening who thinks that appeals, do get in touch with us, because that group is growing all the time.
Fantastic. Anybody else for any final thoughts of charities or organisations for support, or just any final reflections?
This is local to me in Surrey, but the Lucy Rayner Foundation in Surrey is amazing and offer free counselling sessions to anyone in Surrey bereaved by suicide. But I'm sure on the Hub of Hope there'll be lots of charities specific to people's areas.
Definitely, for anybody that's not aware of the Hub of Hope, it's an app that's available for your phone or website. So you can just go to the Hub of Hope and put in your postcode or somebody else's postcode, or use your location on your phone to find mental health services and support and bereavement support that's local to where you are. So again, an invaluable resource, not just for bereavement, but for a lot of mental health services that are out there. And I think we've done a pretty good job in the last hour of promoting some great organisations that are supporting people. All of the details of the charities and organisations that we've discussed today will be available in the show notes. As I opened up this conversation, there are people, including the Samaritans and Shout, that can be contacted 24/7 if you feel you need to talk to somebody, or even if you've been bereaved by suicide and you feel you need somebody to talk to. The Samaritans are there as well to listen, and they can be called on 116 123. And Shout, you can text the word Shout to 85258 and you can have a chat over text. But I'm going to draw this conversation to a close. Massive thank you from all of us at the Speakers Collective for making this conversation happen. And thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this meaningful conversation. To find out more about the Speakers Collective, visit speakerscollective.org, and don't forget to like, subscribe and comment on this podcast. Thank you.